Allow me to introduce myself.
I am the last sane sports fan.
I am a genius by trade.
I just knew too much. Does that make me crazy? Does that make me crazy? Does that make me crazy? Possibly.
Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to The View from the Midwest. It's time for another NFL Monday quarterback edition, a playoff edition at that, as we go over the Wildcard games that happened over the weekend. And let's get right into it because there were some really interesting games. We'll kind of start from the most recent one and work our way backwards, as that's kind of the way they happened in terms of interest. Well, not necessarily the Chiefs game, but we'll get to that in just a moment. The Packers beat the Redskins 35-18, and it was really an interesting game because it looked right from the get-go as though it was going to be a Washington Redskins victory because they rushed out. They got a sack on Aaron Rodgers in the end zone right off the bat, pretty much, in Green Bay's first offensive possession. And it looked like it was just going to be that kind of day. It wasn't that necessarily great of a sack. It was kind of a blown coverage kind of sack. So you're sitting there thinking, well, Green Bay's had some offensive line problems, so therefore it's going to be that kind of day. They're going to give up a lot of sacks. They're going to give up a lot of pressure. Washington's defense is really going to be getting in the backfield and troubling Aaron Rodgers, and that's going to be the way that this game is going to go. But instead, it kind of went the other direction. But Washington did start off fairly well. Kirk Cousins didn't have that bad of a day statistically, 329 yards and a touchdown, so he did fairly well. But Washington only managed 5 points in the first quarter, and I think if they could have gotten more out of that, more out of the first half in general, but more out of that first quarter to be specific, when you've got the momentum of that safety in your back pocket and to only get a field goal the rest of that quarter kind of sucked the energy out of them, I think, a little bit. They got the 6 points in the second quarter, and again, that's just not good enough. You have to be able to score touchdowns to win. They did get the touchdown in the third quarter, but then were shut out in the fourth. But by then, it really didn't matter because it was the second quarter for the Packers that really kind of solidified themselves as going in with the lead into halftime and obviously being able to put off the win towards the end of the game, because they go into halftime, you were down 11-0, and then you rattle off 17 unanswered points before the half to go in to halftime up 17-11, and then they came out, scored a touchdown, which was matched in the third quarter, but 11 unanswered points in the fourth. Now, towards the end of the game, I still kind of heard, oh, well, yeah, this is the Green Bay that we were expecting, that everybody was hoping for, and so on and so forth. And while that's true, I don't know that you can say that this is going to be the Green Bay that you're going to have going forward, because there was a game about 75% of the way through the season to where Green Bay was struggling. They were having the same kind of problems that they had at the end of the year. All of a sudden, Green Bay has a great game, and they're like, yeah, they're back. They're going to win everything now. They're going to be the team to be contended with in the NFC. And then they rattle off like three straight losses or something like that. With the problems that they have, which is receivers not necessarily always catching balls, offensive play calling that isn't always on par, and offensive line problems, then those are problems that are always going to rear their head at the wrong time. So you can't necessarily trust them. But on the flip side of that coin, when you've got Aaron Rodgers, when you've got Lacey, when you've got Stacy, then you're going to have good offensive weapons. So it's up to the defense and it's up to the offensive line to provide just enough to get them through. Because Aaron Rodgers, once he gets in a position to win, is not likely to make many mistakes to where they're going to cost themselves. So the rest of the team can't make mistakes either, because then they give themselves a chance to win. Kind of jumping around here. I know I said I was going to work backwards, but we're going to go a little bit off the beaten path. Chiefs over the Texans, 30-0. I apologize to any Texans fans out there, but since I follow the Colts a little bit more, due to the fact that I have a friend who lives there, well, doesn't live there, but supports the team, used to live around that area. I know a little bit more about the Colts. And I understand that the Colts were devastated by injuries. I mean, they were down to a quarterback who wasn't even on the roster towards the end of the year, and they had offensive line problems, unbelievably so, and it was just kind of a mess of a year. But as bad as Houston looked in that playoff game, you wonder how Indianapolis didn't win that division with all the problems that they ended up having. I mean, Brian Hoyer had 136 yards and 4 interceptions. Alex Smith, another Alex Smith day, 190 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Nobody had 100 yards rushing. Blue had 99 yards for the Houston Texans. Leading rusher was Ware for Kansas City with 67 yards. Kelsey was the leading receiver for Kansas City. He had 128 yards. But this one was over from the get-go. And quite frankly, most people knew that it was going to be that way. I was kind of saying that it was going to be that way. I didn't necessarily know that Houston was going to get shut out. I thought they'd be able to score some points, field goal, touchdown here or there. But, I mean, they just didn't even look like they were interested in scoring in this one. They were just, I understand that they won a division, but, I mean, this case, and I don't agree with this argument, let me state that right up front, but Houston's case really kind of made an argument for not just allowing division winners into the playoffs, because there were so many other teams out there that would have put up more of a fight, more of a game in this than the Houston Texans did. And then you get some weird situation where I don't know if he's friends with J.J. Watt or what happened, but Arnold Schwarzenegger does this kind of odd video saying that they didn't lose the game because they picked themselves up and that's what winners do, and etc. and so on. I'm sure it's on YouTube if you want to go and take a look, which they are losers. J.J. Watt himself is not a loser, but the team lost the game, and incredibly so. They had absolutely no shot at winning the game. This wasn't like the Bengals or the Vikings, which I'll get to in a second. This wasn't a situation like that. Houston really didn't deserve to be in the game the way that they played. And that's just kind of the bottom line. And again, I'm not trying to get under the skin of Texans fans. They deserve to take whatever joy they can out of this season because they made the playoffs. They're division champions, and nobody can ever take that away. But once they got in, once they showed who they truly were, they weren't anywhere near good enough. And it was kind of an embarrassing game to watch from a neutral standpoint because I wasn't rooting for one team or the other. And it just wasn't anything to watch. I mean, it was a struggle to kind of see what happened in that football game because Kansas City was without Jeremy Maclin. He got hurt. He's got a high ankle sprain now. Alex Smith is a fine quarterback, but he's not a great quarterback. When you're not even passing for 200 yards for the last few weeks of the season, then you're obviously not being counted on to win. They're just making sure that you don't cost them the game, which he has been very good at doing. And he's very good at running the ball when he needs to and making good decisions. That's why he's a good quarterback, but not a great quarterback. Can Kansas City win with that kind of system? I kind of doubt it. But who would have thought that Kansas City was going to rattle off 11 straight wins now if you include their playoff win? Nobody would have said that they would have done that after a 1-5 start. So maybe they can carry this to a Super Bowl. We'll have to wait and see. Talking about some of the other games that went on, obviously the two big ones were the Seahawks and Vikings and the Steelers and Bengals. Let's focus on the NFC as the Seahawks pull off an improbable win by the score of 10-9. This one was another one that was kind of tough to watch if you like offensive football. If you like just kind of good back and forth, it was a really entertaining game. Quarterbacks had days to forget. Russell Wilson, 142 yards, a touchdown and a pick. Teddy Bridgewater, 146 yards, no scores. Adrian Peterson was the leading rusher for Minnesota, but he had a terrible day, 45 yards and a fumble that really kind of cost them towards the end of the game. And nobody had that great of a day offensively either. Almost all the points came towards the end of the game. Minnesota had a field goal in the first half. That was the only score for either team. Then they had 6 points in the third quarter. So they go into the fourth quarter up 9-0. And then they allow the Seahawks to get 10 straight points to take the lead. and you think, okay, well, this is going to be a typical Seahawks win. They didn't deserve to, but they found a way to do it and ultimately got the victory. But then, as happened in the last couple games of the day, the last in the wild card round, Minnesota drives down after surviving an Adrian Peterson fumble, which pretty much kind of cost them the game, because then they would have been able to salt the game away, or at least drive down and kick another field goal and really put the game kind of out of reach. But instead, they still managed to get the ball back with about like 90 seconds left, something like that. They drive it down. They get a couple fortunate penalty calls. They draw a pass interference call, and then the same tight end who drew the pass interference ends up catching one on Cam Chancellor, who's a very good defender, spinning away from him. And I still say if he would have cut back into the field, he might have been able to score. Instead, he tried to run his own player over who was busy blocking somebody. But I haven't played football enough to know whether or not that was really the kind of play that should have been made. That being said, all of a sudden you get a 20, I believe it's a 27-yard field goal, although I've heard some people say 21, but I'm going to go with 27 because I thought that's what the announcer said. Anyway, chip shot field goal, basically an old extra point to win the game. And granted, it was on the left hash mark, but to me that shouldn't make a difference. And then just everything went terribly, terribly wrong for the Vikings. The ball is snapped, it goes down without a hitch. All of a sudden the laces are in, though. I don't know if psychologically that messed up the kicker, because he had kicked one with the laces in earlier in the game and made quite a long field goal off of it. But the laces were in, but he shanked it immediately. I don't know if he saw the laces and was just pissed off or something, but he shanked it almost immediately. There was absolutely no chance that the wind affected it. Nobody got a hand on it. It just went straight left. It was one of the worst kicks I've ever seen from one of the better kickers in the entire league. And Minnesota, just a heartbreaking way to win. And Seattle, I mean, again, they get the victory. Did they deserve it? Not necessarily, but they find ways to do it. And if you have to rely on somebody else missing a kick, that's not necessarily your best day, but you won the game in the end. And they're going on to a potential semifinal. But they're going on to a semifinal round now with a chance to go to another Super Bowl still on the line, whereas Minnesota's going home. And unfortunately, since Minnesota's a Midwestern team, we covered them a little bit more here. But Seattle, I've seen some of them too. They've been fortunate, but they've been really good throughout the season as well. So you do have to give credit to them for doing just enough to win the game. It's just sad that it came down to a kick like that, to where just he missed it so terribly, so that you feel for him, and as well as the Minnesota fans. But Seattle just finding a way, as they usually do. Now we'll get to the big one here, which was the Steelers versus the Bengals. The Steelers win. They will be going on. Looking at some of the stats, Ben Roethlisberger had 229 yards and a touchdown, but he almost didn't finish the game. He had a shoulder injury. A.J. McCarron, not a great day, but he had a pretty good day for him. 212 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Hill was the leading rusher for the Bengals. He had 50 yards, a touchdown, but a fumble. That was a huge one. And leading receivers were obviously Antonio Brown with 119 yards. A.J. Green was the leading receiver for the Bengals with 71 yards and a touchdown. Looked like it was going to be the game-winning touchdown. Went scoreless in the first. Cincinnati couldn't score in the second, but Pittsburgh had 6 points. Pittsburgh had 9 points in the third. Looked like they were going to run away with this thing. Then all of a sudden, Cincinnati comes alive in the fourth quarter. They score 16 points. Pittsburgh got the field goal to win the game towards the end, but that's where everything went wrong, because Cincinnati, they were making a huge comeback. And they drive down the field. They get it to A.J. Green. They score it. They put them up by 1 point, 16-15. They go for two. But they were too jubilant, it seemed, at getting the touchdown, because their play calling and their execution on the 2-point conversion was just absolutely the worst. They go with some silly lateral play to Hill, to where I don't know what the play call was, why they called it like that, because it was a silly play to begin with, if that's what was called. Because if he drops it, then all of a sudden Pittsburgh can run it back. He doesn't drop it, but he's basically faced with nothing except a wall of white with the Pittsburgh Steelers right in front of him. I guess if he wanted to, and the play was not illegal because of offensive linemen, he could have just tried to chuck it into the end zone, but running backs aren't thinking of that kind of thing because that's not what is being asked of them. So anyway, the play call was terrible on the 2-point conversion, and then just really everything terribly that could go wrong basically did go wrong, because Pittsburgh gets the ball, they're down by 1 obviously. First play, after the kickoff, I mean, because Pittsburgh was pinned along the 15-yard line or so, give or take. Then Landry Jones would come in for the injured Ben Roethlisberger, throws an interception. So you think the game is over at this point. There is still about 90 seconds left, and Pittsburgh had all 3 of its timeouts. So they would have gotten the ball back. But you figure at that juncture, at least Cincinnati could kick a field goal. Well, instead, on their first play, Hill ends up fumbling the ball. And that play just went incredibly wrong. So then Pittsburgh gets the ball back. And then Pittsburgh ends up driving down the field because Ben Roethlisberger's come in. He's throwing a lot of short passes and trying to put too much strain on that shoulder. But he goes all the way down, gets it towards the 50. But still, they weren't necessarily even close to field goal range for their kicker. And Ben Roethlisberger throws one over the middle. Antonio Brown misses it quite badly because the throw was high, so it goes off his fingertips. He clearly not caught the ball, comes down, lowers his head because he was off balance, and the linebacker from the Bengals decides to put his shoulder right into his helmet, an incredibly dirty play. There was no way that he didn't know what he was doing right there. 15-yard penalty right there. It was one of the more shameful hits that I've seen all season long, in a situation where you just cannot do that. I don't care what kind of history you've got with this player, with this team. You cannot put your team in that kind of situation when you're winning by a point, and you cannot afford to give them any kind of field position. All of a sudden, that would have put them into field goal range, and then everything kind of went wrong because Pac-Man Jones was called for a personal foul. He touched the referee regardless of how light it was. You cannot touch an official. Now, the official might have been looking to throw a flag. Why Joey Porter didn't get a flag for Pittsburgh as well is also questionable. There were a lot of different things that could have happened to swing this game in the Bengals' favor. There was a similar hit to the one that happened on Antonio Brown in reverse that didn't get called in the Bengals' favor. That could have changed the way things were. So there were a lot of questionable refereeing decisions throughout this game. But if you're the Cincinnati Bengals, I don't care what you say. I don't care what happened earlier in the game. I don't care how fair it is. You have to be within your own self and contain your emotions when you know that you're up by a point and you are continually hurting your chances to win by doing these stupid things. Pac-Man Jones, you cannot touch an official. I don't care if there's another coach on the field. I don't care who's on the field. You have to remove yourself from the situation. That is not his personality, and I completely understand that. But you have to realize the gravity of the situation and the scenario that you're in. And with everything that happened, even though I was personally rooting for the Bengals just a little bit, just to kind of have some new blood in there, because Cincinnati really isn't in those kind of situations very much, just to kind of get the monkey off of Marvin Lewis's back, because I think he's a decent coach. But obviously he doesn't have control of his players very well, and ultimately Cincinnati deserved to lose that game because they couldn't keep things under control towards the end when victory was in their grasp, and they basically threw it away. They didn't just let it slip away. They threw it right back in the Steelers' face and said, here you go. Because ultimately it ended up being a chip-chop field goal after 2 15-yard penalties, and Pittsburgh ends up going on. They will take on the Denver Broncos. So that'll be an interesting matchup as Roethlisberger takes on Manning, and a lot of the other playoffs will be interesting to see what happens as we go along. Kansas City against New England, Seahawks against the Panthers, and Green Bay will take on the Arizona Cardinals. So it should be an interesting playoff matchup for the rest of the way. That is The View from the Midwest. What are your views on all the games that happen? I know a lot of you have to have opinions on at least the Vikings and the Bengals games, the way that they ended. Let me know in the comments section below. Comment, rate, and subscribe. But until the next time, I'll see you then.